I was introduced by my cousins who gave me the original trilogy video cassettes for Christmas, and I probably watched them each about 10 times.
I don't even remember what age I was because I feel like Star Wars has just always been known to me. It was one of my dad's favorite films. We started doing a whole thing of every Christmas time we'd open presents and then we'd throw on one of the Star Wars movies, the originals. My dad doesn't do the prequels.
I was 6 years old and my brother and I were on a road trip, and we had one of those old suburban SUVs that had a VCR, and my parents had just bought the special edition VHS tapes and just put those in the cassettes, and we just watched them, and I just remember how much fun it was.
So my dad introduced it to me and my brother when we were really young, so it was like one of the first things he had us watch as soon as we got past the Disney stage, so 2 or 3.
My dad, he exposed me to Star Wars as a young kid with A New Hope, but back then he called it just Star Wars because that's what his generation was.
I was born into a family that loved Star Wars. My dad remembers going to 1977 to the movie theaters, and the only spot available was the front row, so he sees the Star Destroyer like this. It was an experience I'll never forget. My mom, my goodness, was a mega Star Wars fan. We're talking waited in line for 3 days for Return of the Jedi, completely spoiler-free. Looked up all the spoilers for Empire, including the twist that she thought was a fake. Snuck onto the set of Return of the Jedi and stole a piece of Jabba's sail barge, and we still have that to this day. That's just the household that I grew up in.
I was introduced to Star Wars back in 2003 when my dad decided to build a fully functional, life-size, remote control R2-D2 unit as part of the R2 Builders Club.
They redid them in the movie theaters. They released them in the movie theaters during the 90s. In 97, if I remember, they did it years after for the anniversary. And that was my first movie I ever saw in the movie theater. And my mom explains the experience as she's never seen my eyes wider, my jaw dropped any lower, or someone who was more engaged with a movie at that age in her entire life. So that's kind of my introduction. It's my first movie in the movie theater. I was constantly asking questions. I was super engaged, and I think that the tone of that movie is really represented in that through my reaction, and I feel. So I have a very, very childhood precious experience with this franchise. So
this was how the current generation first encountered the franchise known as Star Wars, but its rocky history begins in the early 1970s when filmmaker George Lucas began work on his science fiction story.
George Lucas, obviously a man who is very much well connected with Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese. They were the Rat Pack, or not the Rat Pack, the movie brats back in the day. They always made movies. How I got introduced to George Lucas was actually through Indiana Jones, and that's how I knew about Lucas, and then Lucasfilms. And the one thing I could say about George Lucas, I really think that he's a very good innovator when it comes to special effects. He grounded what good science fiction special effects look like, especially if you look at the original Star Wars. It's very awesome with it's very cool, puppetry and all that. So I think he's very good when it comes to special effects.
For me, George Lucas and Star Wars were always together. I haven't really ever known the guy before Star Wars, but to me it's always been one entity because I was born in 1990, so for me it's always been there. So as far as George Lucas before Star Wars, there's really nothing that I know about him too much. I knew about THX 1138 and how that's become a running gag in Star Trek and Pixar. But that's pretty much what I know about George Lucas. I mean, and I think he's still doing stuff today. I remember go seeing Red Tails after the prequel trilogy, but before the sequel trilogy came out. So I'm not sure if he's still doing stuff or not.
Well, I was very impressed with how he created Zoetrope Studios and how he funded his first few films with very, very shoestring budget and still made them look decently good and do really well.
Well, George Lucas was incredibly and profoundly affected by the studies of Joseph Campbell in his academic practice of comparative religion and mythology, and using specifically A Hero with a Thousand Faces, the text that kind of codified, that Campbell used to codify what he considered to be the archetypal hero's journey that he found consistently throughout, the belief systems of mankind going back to antiquity. And so George Lucas did his best to kind of codify those and create a manageable story that kind of exemplified all of the key components of Campbell's work.
Journey of the hero, where he meets the old mentor, he gets a quest, a call to action, and then he goes off into the world, and at first he succeeds and he does really well, and then he falls, the heroes fall, and there's the cycle again of redemption after that and going around in that arc of story. I think it helped Lucas out because it's a human story. Everyone likes tragedy, everyone likes adversary and rising above adversary. So the fact that Luke, this farm boy nobody, could raise up to take on the entire empire, I think that really helped his storytelling throughout the trilogy.
So I know that it took him a very long time to make these films, especially the original trilogy. I know that it took him nearly almost like 5 years or something like that to write all three of them. I know he took inspirations from ones like World War II dogfights, The Wizard of Oz, a Kurosawa film. I can't even remember off the top of my head what it was, but yeah, it's hard, and I could see where he's coming from when he's trying to do something new and creative.
After many years of inspiration and writing, begging to fund the project, hiring the crew and actors, Lucas started production on the first film, and everything that could go wrong went wrong.
It was like an editor's nightmare. Like, it was basically a movie that was saved in editing. From like the original cut of Star Wars looked bad. Like, I've seen shots of Luke and Obi-Wan in the speeder, like driving like this, and the camera's right here, and they're going like this. So it's like, how about we just have a really nice wide shot? It's like have like John Williams' like epic score being played, and Alec Guinness and a tall man in a rubber Halloween costume, looked really great in editing. But if you look at it in one shot, I'm like, wow, this is bad. But editing made it look great. The sound effects made it look great. There wasn't even like music for that part. But so I just know that the editing saved Star Wars, and then John Williams didn't just save it; he amplified it to like unmatched levels.
I just think that he was so driven, and really he had a lot of perseverance and patience and dedication, with everyone not really having any hope that this was going to be a thing that makes millions of dollars by this point.
Constant reshoots, constant making fun of the script by actors on set and stuff like that. So it was a very different filmmaking process entirely. No one wanted to fund it. No one wanted to get it up and going. No one was really interested in the script or the story because it's never been done before. It was a very weird project. Everyone titled it very weird.
There was little faith the project would do well, with the studio thinking they should stop the production at one point, but Lucas's persistence paid off. On May 25th, 1977, Star Wars was released, and the reception was massive. Audiences everywhere went crazy for it, but how did something like this manage to change cinema?
I would argue that it was the first successful and major franchise that made a debut in cinema. Like, right now we have the MCU. I'm looking around, I see, Godzilla. Like, that was kind of big in Japan, but nothing came along for Star Wars. Because Star Wars, like, oh, Star Wars, it's like there's a new Star Wars movie coming out, it's like Empire, or it's Jedi, and then it's like, oh, we have all this EU stuff, and then the prequels dropped, and then it was bought out by Disney, and then the sequels, now all this Disney Plus shows, and it just became this, it's become part of human culture to this point. You can't go to a store that sells like anything, you won't find Star Wars there. It's like, oh, it's Happy Birthday with like Darth Vader. It's like, oh, Happy Father's Day, and it's like you will always find a Darth Vader Father's Day card for anything. I'm sure in 100 years from now there'll still be a Father's Day of Darth Vader. They may remake it in like 20 years by Disney, or like 100 years down the line they'll remake it again. But I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen. They're going to remake Star Wars in the next 30 years.
With its success, Star Wars was all but destined for a sequel. But how could one top something so massive? By making it more massive, with more effects, more characters, and one of the greatest cinematic twists of all time, that the villain Darth Vader is the father of the hero Luke Skywalker. A twist that still shocks to this day.
I definitely did not see that coming. I was very surprised. I remember just being, I was probably 6 years old and just being, no, just screaming and just being so completely upset. But then it's okay because then I put in Return of the Jedi and then Luke beats his dad. And so that was heartwarming to me.
I mean, the first time I watched it, I don't think it really clicked because I was probably like 3 or 4. And by the time I got old enough, I think, to really recognize what it would have meant, I'd already seen it so many times that it just didn't have that like profound effect. But I love making everybody who has never seen Star Wars watch 4 and 5 first, so that they get, I mean, everyone knows the twist, but like, I like making it so that they have to watch that first.
It's like one of those twists, it's like the Sixth Sense, where you can't tell anybody what this twist is. You can't really say anything because you have to experience it.
I don't think I remember it because of how young I was when I actually first saw these films and these movies. So I don't think I remember or really kind of understood. I kind of knew the line already because Star Wars is the biggest thing talked about, and that twist came out years before I was born, So I don't know if I've really like dived and indulged and experienced the twist like it was meant to. But I do know that I'm like, oh my god, that's Luke's dad? Whoa, what is he gonna do? I do remember having that conflict watching the movie as a kid growing up, but I don't think that I really had an initial reaction to that specific twist, only because, I was a kid and this twist was developed way before films had this type of twist. So I've seen movies that had this before, so it kind of, it's hit or miss for that one.
As far as the twist goes, I've always known about it. It's not like I was like a 4-year-old kid and I'm watching it for the first time like, oh. It's like it's always been engraved in my brain, but that's I would argue the greatest twist or the most popular twist in all of media. Like not even just movies in general. You could argue like Rosebud is the sleigh or something, but Luke, I am your father. If you walk in knowing nothing, but now I don't think you can find like YouTube clips every like 2-3 months of like someone watching it for the first time, not knowing that and getting like a genuine what reaction.
After The Empire Strikes Back came Return of the Jedi, which marked the conclusion of the original Star Wars trilogy. And even to this day, the franchise entertains and inspires countless individuals all over the world.
I think Star Wars speaks to something that's at the core of all people. And I think that that's partially why Joseph Campbell's work was so influential on Lucas, is because he was able to find that thing that speaks to our core, each and every one of us. And so, great epic myths like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Harry Potter, the reason that they resonate with such a wide swath of the population is because it specifically is able to tug at those heartstrings that for a lot of people don't get moved on an everyday basis. And so, especially when you're unaware of them. An epic series like Star Wars really kind of taps into that. And that's one of the reasons why I think it has such a wide following.
This was the start of the sci-fi movies that were coming out. I personally love sci-fi. I think it was really great because it blew out all the stops of it. It had action, it had a love interest, it had heartfelt things and familial ties. It kind of addressed everything while still being action and sci-fi. And it was such a new way of experiencing film. I remember my dad told me he was one of the people that camped out in a tent the nights before the film would come out in theaters, and he said that once the words drifted off screen and a huge spaceship just drifted overhead, everyone in the theater was just blown away because no one had ever seen anything like that before. Special effects were by no means what they are today, and so it was just such an experience, and it kind of changed how movies are watched. That I think that so many other films have drawn off of that and worked off of that you kind of have to go back and see that original series in order to appreciate where we've come from there.
I see more people dress up as the costumes when they go over to see a movie, because it's not an event, it's a gathering of everybody. So everybody knows what Star Wars is. It's a household name.
At its foundation, it's a story about hope, and I think a lot of people like believing that no matter what kind of situation you end up in, you can persevere, get past it, no matter what happens.
It's cool. Like, oh, it's a sword. Oh, it's a laser sword. Oh, they're fighting ships and they're like cool design. And the villains is just like some. It's not just a man with a face who's like, oh, that's Alec Guinness or that's Brown Spark, but it's Darth Vader's like in a helmet, so anyone can dress as him. Anyone can be Darth Vader. Luke's always like, a really good go-getter guy. Princess Leia was like, or one of the original badass women, like badass princess. I don't think that was a thing before that. Sure you find examples and such, but she was like, what the hell if I got out and pushed? It might. But and Han Solo was just like such an awesome character. Like the characters were awesome, and the setting was like something amazing that's like hadn't really been done to the scale before. You can always find sci-fi like Star Trek and such, but this is just like that was more about the science than the fiction. This is more about the fantasy of like science fantasy and just like the interpersonal dramas of the Skywalker family.
It's a human story when you take away all of the spaceships and lightsaber fights. It's a story about a farm boy who goes on this journey to become someone great. I remember one of my Chapman professors saying that you have a good story when you can take out all of the supernatural and fantastical elements and still have a story.
It stirred box office, it stirred conversations, it stirred lore, it stirred merchandise. It did so big and it's so giant from when it first came out to where I don't even think I have the answer to that question, because it's so much bigger than how I feel about it.
One thing that surprised many when Star Wars was first released was the demand for merchandise, specifically toys. From the little toy company Kenner to the mega corporation of Hasbro, the force continues to remain strong with the endless amounts of Star Wars products.
I probably owned most of the lightsabers that came out, like the big foldable extendable ones that made the noise.
Mostly lightsabers. I probably owned like 6 different types of the Millennium Falcon. I had it was like the Simon Says Millennium Falcon that would have like quotes, and you'd have to match them up with each other. I had like the toy Millennium Falcon that you'd press the back button and it would make like the whooshing sound.
Probably the one thing that I collected when Star Wars came out was little Revenge of the Sith action figures. I used to love General Grievous.
I didn't own it, but I made it. I love the movie so much that I kind of like drew up a 4-year-old's equivalent of the whole movie in like 100 pages using crayons, and I like staple it using like lined ruled paper, and they looked bad, but they looked like there was so much heart put into it as like a 4-year-old kid, and that was like something I think I still have it like in a drawer somewhere, but it's one of those things where I go like, ugh, but at the same time, like, oh, it's kind of cool.
Growing up, every Christmas was every Lego set. I built my own lightsaber on this website. It cost me almost $800 to build. Those are a couple things that I have that I kind of hold dear. And I just got that new Rise of Skywalker Millennium Falcon. It's my first Millennium Falcon Lego set, so that was kind of cool.
And along with the other merchandise came video games.
Oh, I want to play the arcade game that you play at like Boomers or Dave and Buster's or something like that, where you had like the control stick and all that. I played Shadows of the Empire, which is my all-time favorite N64 game. I played the Force Unleashed when I graduated high school. And those games were really fun, and I really liked those. I know some people have their own qualms about them, but I still think they're enjoyable. I played the pod racing game for the N64, and sometimes for the PlayStation when I was younger. I just remember it was like a blast. I liked being able to customize my own pod racer. I liked the sequence in the movie for the pod racing scene was like, I know it was drawn out, but it was really fun. It was like its like own version of street racing. So
the first video game console I ever owned was the Nintendo 64, and we got 3 games on launch day: Super Mario 64, yay! Superman 64, ugh! And Rogue Squadron. Rogue Squadron was great. Like I love Rogue Squadron. Played it, made sure I gold medaled everything, and was very disappointed that like if you get all gold medals, you can unlock a brand new level, and it's like Hoth. I'm like, really? If we got all the silver medals, we unlocked the Death Star trench run. I'm just like, I was hoping to get like, you know, the second Death Star run through the core and such, but that didn't happen. What happened in the second one, which I played? But to me, the most important games that I played, that I loved the most as a growing up as a kid, was Rebel Assault and Rebel Assault 2 for the Macintosh computer. It was basically an on-rails shooter game, and it was like just, swing this way to avoid it, or just shoot the things. The first game was like almost pixelated, so the characters would talk like this the entire time when they would just talk, and there would be dialogue over it. And then the second one, for some reason, had actual actors for the cutscenes in full costume. It was like, I think the first time they ever used like the props for a video game, like actual like by Lucasfilm. And it was a ton of fun. I remember virtually everything about it. Was called like, I think, the Hidden Empire, where the Empire's created like these invisible TIE fighters, and you have to like go to the factory, and you have to destroy the factory, which is basically an invisible thing on a moon that's like sucking all the energy from the planet. And you have to destroy the whole thing. It was great. And they had a Darth Vader guy there, and he sounded like this: "Very well, Admiral. Engage the rebels." I'm like, that was terrible.